It's rape.
It's rape.
Not because of where we were. Not because of how we dress.
Not because of how we dress.
El violador eres tú. El violador eres tú.
El violador eres tú.
El Estado opresor es un macho violador.
El Estado opresor es un macho violador.
El Estado no me cuida, me cuidan mis amigas.
El Estado no me cuida, me cuidan mis amigas.
El violador eres tú.
El violador eres tú.
It's the police.
It's the police.
It's the judges.
It's the judges.
It's
the state.
It's imperialism.
It's imperialism.
It's capitalism.
It's capitalism.
The rapist is you.
The rapist is you.
Thank you. So, what we're going to do next is have a speak out by different people who would like to speak out, who have already agreed to, and then we will open it up for anybody to speak out. Any woman to speak out around violence against women. And what we mean about violence against women is poverty, displacement, racism, etc. And you know, femicide, disappearance, rape, and anything else that, you know, there's so many ways that we experience violence, all of us. And so this day we are dedicating to speaking out against violence against women. So you're gonna call the people? Yeah. Introduce her. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? You unmute yourself.
Huh?
Anyway,
Don't touch, okay?
Hi, Christine. Can you wave?
Hi.
Hi. Sorry, first, really quick, my name is Eva Padilla. I'm very recent board member of Chapter Support Committee. It's an honor of a lifetime. I have been studying, following, admiring, trying to walk my life in the better footsteps of Black Zapatistas since like 2003, 2002-ish. It's quite an honor. This is my beautiful friend, Christine. She is one of the few founding members of Student Sovereignty. They are a North American Indigenous woman rights, Indigenous rights collective, predominantly run by women. And they do a lot of really important work, so many things. So if we could all wave to Christine, that'd be really rad, because she's joining us from Iowa.
Hello.
She was supposed to be here in person because she flies around doing lots of beautiful conferences. You know, she got a little sick and wasn't able to join us here in Oakland. And so, thank you. So we're trying to bring her into the conversation. Incredibly wise and has so much knowledge that I'm so excited for her to share today. So Christine, if you could share a little brief intro and then I'll further intro the topic.
Tansi, Ponapita Gisagao. Hello, good afternoon. That's what that means in my language. My name is Sikowis Nobiss, or also Sikowis, which means fierce in Imipu. And I'd like to recognize the land I live on today, the stolen land, as the territory of the Iowa and Meskwaki and the many other nations that thrived here before removal and genocide. I am in the state of Iowa, and an Iowa elder told me once that it means sleepy one. We don't know for sure. I'd also like to thank Yvette, one of my very best friends, and all of the organizers for this very important and crucial meeting. It's an honor to be here today, to be able to speak to this group, to feel like I'm standing with people that are really fighting the good fight and doing what they can do to make change and stop femicide and stop the extraction industry from ruining the world. And I don't know how much more you want me to say, Yvette, but.
We're going to come back to you. Thank you
Okay.
so much. Thank you. Thank you. So the topic that we're speaking on today, I'm definitely not an expert. Just something that I'm incredibly passionate about, that Las Zapatistas and being an Indigenous woman, and I'll just give you a really brief bio of myself. I'm California native Chumash. My father's name is Ram Padilla. He's Chumash and Mexican. My mother's name is Eva Padilla. She is Mexican Salvadoreña. And so I am both straddling this false border, and my ancestors, like so many of us here, the Odom brother, that panel earlier today was really powerful for me, talking about the ants and how our ancestors migrated across these borders. So I'm California native, and I'm south of the border native. And Las Zapatistas, I had the privilege of going to the Women's Encuentro in 2018. And the most powerful thing I took away from that, so many powerful things, but the one that really hit me really hard was were the femicides, the femicidos. And they are the same as the epidemic that is inflicting our sisters north of that quote unquote border, which is something we're referring to as MMIW. Some of you have gifted some beautiful scarves and some banderas today from our brother Norm. It was such a blessing to be here with us today. MMIW stands for Murdered Missing Indigenous Women and Girls. It started in Canada. I know Christine introduced herself, but also she's First Nations Canadian, and this movement really started up there. But I think the point that I want to make is it's an epidemic on this continent is killing women, Indigenous women. It's the same. And all of our stories are unique, and all of our stories are important, and all of them need to be heard 1,000%, 1,000,000%, but also they're the same. They're killing us. They're killing our sisters. My sister recently died. Luckily not due to being murdered, but she died due to a colonial epidemic, which is diabetes. She died a month before her 37th birthday. I am now a month before my 37th birthday. So it's the same. And, we're talking about the earth and the land. And the more that our Indigenous women are dying, the more that our earth is dying. So I just want to bridge those connections. Las Zapatistas, one of their founding principles is ending violence against women, ending these femicides. It was a huge part of the encuentros, and it was really, really powerful to see mothers, some of the mothers here with pictures of their daughters on their chests, walking around the whole weekend. These huge
portraits of their daughters on their chest. Some of these pictures are here today. I printed out. Yeah, so I'm going to turn it over to Christine, and she's going to share with us a little bit of background about MMIW and the history of how it relates to capitalism, and a little bit of history about its roots and its origins in Canada, and then now how beautifully it is coming down to fulfill that Eagle and Condor prophecy of we need to bridge these stories and these histories together so that we can come to heal north and south of the border. So I'm gonna turn it over to Christine. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yvette. Before I begin, can I ask what the time limit is here so I can adjust accordingly?
Catalina? Like what? Like 10, I guess like 10, 20, Christine?
Okay, good to know. Because I could talk about this for a very long time, which is a very unfortunate thing, actually. So yeah, my name is Christine, or Sikowis. I grew up in Winnipeg, Manitoba, which is a city with a very large Indigenous population, probably the largest per capita in the on Turtle Island. And I come from the George Gordon Plains Cree Saulteaux First Nation, which is in Saskatchewan. I came here to get my master's degree 15 years ago, and now I live in Iowa, or I should say the occupied territory now called Iowa. As I've gotten older and looked back how I grew up in the inner city or the like Indigenous ghettos of Winnipeg, I realize now how lucky I am to not have fallen into horrible situations where I could have been abused, assaulted, and or murdered, because this place in Winnipeg is actually has a very high concentration of MMIW cases. And I just want to talk about three things today, kind of tie them all together. That is the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and Two-Spirit, and LGBTQ, and relatives, the high rates that we have on Turtle Island due to many different things, and then colonial capitalism and border imperialism, and how all three of these are intricately tied together. And if we can, at least stop one of these, what I would call black snakes, then we can stop it all. The statistics surrounding missing and murdered Indigenous women are really hard to calculate, but as of 2016, the National Crime Information Center reported that there's about 5,712 missing and murdered Native American and Alaska Native women in the US. That number, I think, is underreported. And in Canada, they say there's about over 1,000. But if you talk to grassroots organizers, they'll tell you that there's probably about 4,000 missing and murdered women. On some of the reservations in the US, the murder rate is 10 times the national average. But let's not forget to factor in suicide, because since 1999, the suicide rate for Indigenous women in the US has risen 139%, and also 71% for Indigenous men. I can't tell you every reason why the suicide rate has increased specifically, but I would say that a huge factor for the rise in suicide has a lot to do with the amount of abuse that Indigenous women encounter every day, which I think should be also woven into the statistics of missing and murdered Indigenous women, because these women are killing themselves due to the exact abuse that also makes them become missing and murders them. The reality is that we also have the highest rape and assault rates in the country. Older statistics used to say, it was 1 in 3 women that would be raped or experience sexual assaults in their lifetime. But recently, the Department of Justice increased that to 56%. But when you talk to grassroots organizers on different reservations, like some people will say that as many as 90% of women and girls in their communities will be raped or sexually assaulted in their lifetime. So the cases are astronomical, and I absolutely think that these rates are equivalent anywhere else in the world where there are high indigenous populations and where there are large numbers of non-white people. A new Department of Justice study also told us that in where they studied over 2,000, they surveyed over 2,000 women, that 84% of these women have experienced violence, so not just sexual violence, but like any type of violence. And over 60% have experienced psychological aggression or coercive control, and 90% have experienced violence at the hands of a non-tribal member. And that also goes for our men as well. Throughout our lifetimes, Indigenous peoples in the US and in Canada, I would say it's probably a higher number, will experience some type of racial or physical violence from a non-tribal member, which in most cases is like probably a white person. And so the reason why these numbers are so high, but not even high enough in terms of what the government is collecting, is because we don't have adequate infrastructure and programs to report these cases. And in a lot of cases as well, these people, when they show up, you know, at the morgue, they don't even know how to identify them. They don't have any ID, and a lot of the times people are never found. And this is a very disturbing trend that is actually a crisis, and that is completely underreported by US and Canadian media, to the point where I would absolutely say that the media conglomerates in this country actually support institutionalized white supremacy and oppression of non-white people. One of the issues right now that's really affecting us in the US is the fact that the Violence Against Women Act has not been reinstated and is sitting in Mitch McConnell's graveyard. Mitch McConnell being the head honcho in the Senate on the Republican side, and it took 25 years to craft the Violence Against Women Act into legislation that provides protections and funding for increased protections and funding, mind you, for Indigenous women, immigrant women, and the LGBTQ community, because we experience higher than normal levels of violence in this country. But since Trump took office, the VAWA has not had an official director appointed, the Office of Violence Against Women that oversees VAWA has not had an official director appointed. The definition of domestic violence has been shrunk from like this big to one sentence, and it's, like I said, it's sitting in Mitch McConnell's legislative graveyard due to a loophole, which is called the boyfriend loophole. Recently, the Democratic Democratic-led House passed a reinstitution of this bill, which is called HR 1585, and it basically prohibits a larger range of abusers, such as dating partners and stalkers and former partners, from owning firearms. And this is a really big deal because in the past, the restriction of firearm use was only assigned to domestic partners, who were in long-term relationships and or married to people. So this increased the range of like protection for women in the US from people with firearms, because women in the United States, according to the research done for HR 1585, are 11 times more likely to be murdered with guns than women in other high-income countries. The presence of a gun in domestic violence situations increases the risk of homicide by 500%. With this evidence, put out there, you would think that this current administration would care more about, restricting gun use for abusers. But as we all know, this current administration is very misogynistic and cares more about catering to what the National Rifle Association or the NRA cares about, rather than the rights and safety of half this country's population. So I would ask you all to call your local senator and ask them to pass HR 1585 for the sake of a better future for our women, and in particular, the populations that are affected greatly by violence in this country, which are Indigenous women, immigrant women, and the LGBTQ community. So the violence to Indigenous women in this country is very much linked to violence to Indigenous women all over the world. And we all know the reason why. The bottom line is colonial capitalism. It is the scourge or the plague that has traveled all across this planet and is in the complete antithesis to Indigenous ideologies. And it is the reason why Indigenous people have encountered genocide, colonization, and every other type of violent violation that exists in human history. We right now, Indigenous people are protecting 80% of the world's biodiversity.
Yes.
An amazing feat, considering the effects that colonization and genocide have, done to us. And that's a big reason. That is the reason why Indigenous women are facing so much violence, because violence to the land equals violence to the woman, violence to the woman equals violence to the land. The relentless colonization of our territories has a direct correlation to an increased rate of violence to our people, in particular women. And we, for instance, a good example of what's going on with that is the what happens when man camps are set up. Have you all talked about man camps during this meeting?
I don't think we have not. But
So,
also I would love to personally listen to you speak forever, but that's why we have really long phone calls.
So man camps are temporary workforce housing housing communities that are built up that mostly men go to when people are corporate conglomerates are putting together fossil fuel extraction projects, mining, whatever it is that they're doing. And Indigenous women have reported that the influx of workers into Indigenous communities as a result of extractive projects also have led to increased sexual harassment and violence, including rape and assault. And this is a statistic that we have found from the UN. And also there are studies being done right now in Canada and the US to prove that this is absolutely a thing. And I actually wrote a UN intervention last year at the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, where I spoke about the increased violence to women as extraction is happening in their communities. And so what I've been pushing for a very long time is an Indigenous-led regenerative economy. David Suzuki says it, Noam Chomsky says it, the Drawdown team says it, but most importantly, our ancestors said it, and our Indigenous elders and our people say it, that we have answers. The most effective social impact strategies are one that indigenize the world. Because it's the complete opposite and actually the medicine and the answer to the effects of colonial capitalism, so we can actually combat the climate crisis. We can actually combat classism and oppression and white supremacy with indigeneity. We just, we have to keep working at it. And we need to start convincing the world powers how important our perspective is, whether it be through indigenizing Congress, through protest, or through revolution. Whatever way we do it, it has to be done. Otherwise, we're going to end up in a completely totalitarian world where only the elite run everything, and the rest of us are just there to serve them. Give me 1 second here. I'm just going through my notes. I wanted to talk about big ag really quickly in terms of colonial capitalism, because I know that agriculture has been a huge issue in Chiapas in particular, and in Mexico, in terms of just in general, but even since the North American Free Trade Agreement. And I understand that like so much of what's being grown in these countries is grown by the indigenous people, and it's being taken, exported, and also very much so to the US. I wanted to relate to that because I live in Iowa, and I wanted to give you a little bit of information about what's going on here. Iowa is the most biologically colonized state in the US. It is 90% agriculture, and it used to transition from like oak woodland into savanna to like 80% tall grass prairie, where it was managed through a very beautiful relationship between the buffalo and the indigenous people that existed there. Now Iowa is the #1 contributor to the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, and is actually doing very badly in terms of the Clean Water Act. We have over 700 waterways that are impaired. And just a few years ago, we closed 70% of the beaches here. People, when they go swimming here, get, flesh-eating bacteria and other really weird symptoms in the waterways. And that all has to do with the because most of the land is monocropped by corn and soy, which is GMO, and sprayed nonstop with fertilizers, herbicides, and pesticides. A lot of the fertilizer that they use comes from the 40 million pigs that inhabit Iowa in CAFOs. CAFO stands for Concentrated Animal Feed Operation. And so these animals, this is just pigs, by the way. There's also chicken CAFOs and cow CAFOs, but pigs alone make up a massive amount here in Iowa, and their feces is contained in these ponds that leaches into the ground and has a tremendous amount of heavy metals, antibiotics, and I could go on. So the story, pardon me?
I said, thank you so much, Christine. I'm sorry, I'm just getting the pressure of like time constraints.
Oh, you're getting time? Okay, so what, 2 minutes, 3 minutes?
It's been about time constraints, but it has not been about a limit of knowledge. That's not the problem.
Okay,
So,
well, I can finish in a couple minutes.
yeah.
Okay, so the reason I'm telling you all this is because I want to say that what's happening there is happening here. It's just that people here are not woke yet. Plus, they're not being affected necessarily monetarily, or their lives are not being affected the same way as the indigenous people are being affected in Chiapas. And however, our fields are filled with migrants that are working in these CAFOs and these monocropped big ag industries to make what it is that they're doing happening. So we can make the connection between what's happening here and what's happening there. And I'd like to do more of that. I'd love to do more work with people concerning what's happening across the border, And that's where I'm going to finish with border imperialism. The ongoing colonization of our territories and resources all over the world has resulted in and continues the placement of foreign borders upon territories of indigenous peoples that have inhabited these places since time immemorial. These impositions adversely affects the nationhood and identity of indigenous peoples everywhere. Colonial border policy enforcement coupled with settler state immigration laws are some key factors in eroding indigenous peoples' customs, traditions, and national identities through displacement, restriction of movement, and ongoing encroachment and exploitation of our indigenous territories. So I wanted to finish by saying that that border means absolutely nothing to me, and it should mean nothing to everybody else in that room as well, and that we have to do something about it. I don't have the answers. I support the Otono O'odham people. I support everybody that is trying to cross that border due to displacement in their land, because corporate conglomerates that are backed by governments are basically causing mayhem and upheaval and complete violence and genocide in their territories, and that they have a traditional right to come across that border to be here in Turtle Island, which has an absolute ancient connection. And so I guess that's where I'll end it at. I want to do my best to work more with people, you know, in the South and make a difference. And so I just really appreciate having the ability to speak today. And I thought I was going to have a longer time, so I sort of had to speak fast and skip a bunch of stuff, but I hope that the message got through.
It totally did. Thank you so much. Yes, Christine, we would like to keep you a part of the circle if you can stay on Zoom and hear the rest of the stories. That would be really helpful. Do you have time?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. What was that?
Stay on and listen to the rest of the stories throughout the rest of the circle.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So I think we are moving on to next is Annie, which is Me Too Behind Bars Coalition for Women Prisoners. Is she here? Annie here. Annie. Yay. Okay. I have to move because I'm not sure how far this mic goes. Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Is it working? Thank you very much.
Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, I'm Ani. My name is Ani. And I'm part of the California Coalition for Women Prisoners, together with other folks in this room. We're also part of that organization, both inside and outside prison walls. I also just want to thank you for your words coming from Iowa. Thank you so much for sharing that narrative and sharing that struggle with us here. And
thank you for having me.
Thank you to the Grietas and Campus Support Committee as well for hosting us. I was invited to share a story of resistance from inside the women's prisons in, particularly in the women's prison in California, but particularly coming out of the California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. In November, in 2017, a group of people inside the women's prisons that trans, queer, defiantly gender non-conforming folks started documenting the abuses that they were facing at the hands of prison guards. And one of the ways that they were doing this was, there were multiple ways, but one of the ways that they were doing this was they started mapping the various attacks by the guards against prisoners and where the attacks were happening and which guards were involved. And they would do this, take out a sheet, like a table across their bunks, and start drawing these maps of all the attacks that they were experiencing. At some point, the guards, they made the guards aware actually that they were documenting what they were doing. They didn't share how, but they made the guards aware that they were keeping track of this. And the guards attacked a group of them with a series of both a moment of gendered violence, both a series of brutal acts as well as gendered language that was accompanying the attacks. And I won't go into the details of it, but a brutal attack that resonated with the other attacks that folks have been facing inside. Following the attack, one of the things that they did was they immediately organized to reach out to networks outside of the prisons to get visibility into what had just happened. Some of that involved networks of formerly incarcerated people that were on the outside that they connected with, as well as our collective at seeking help and social within the prisoners. Our response to that was to immediately go in and start collecting narratives of what happened to them. Their other response that they took inside was to also start going through the documentation process, filing complaints, trying to get medical verification of what had happened to them with varying degrees of success. Some of that was blocked by both the guards and the